What's the future look like for food policy here in the United States of America? Is it misguided? I'm talking to Richard Sexton, author of the book Food Fight: Misguided Policies, Supply Challenges, and the Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World, in this very special episode of The Business of Agriculture. Are you looking for productive efficiencies in growing higher yielding, better performing crops? New Fields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. Visit newfieldsag.com for more information to help you farm better. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. I got a great one for you today. So, as you know, I try to keep up with a lot of stuff. That way I can bring it to you, the listener and the viewer of The Business of Agriculture. If you are a listener, I would encourage you to become a viewer. Go to my YouTube channel. Remember, I'm trying to grow that. Just go into YouTube, type in Damian Mason, and hit subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. You can see my commentary videos, like, for instance, the one I just shot this weekend about the crazy notion that we should change out corn syrup and Coca-Cola and replace it with cane sugar so we can import sugar to put in our soda. Doesn't make any sense for a lot of other reasons. Anyway, go to my YouTube channel and hit subscribe. You'll see all my commentary videos, and you can also see this show, The Business of Agriculture. Here's the deal. I'm flying. I pick up the Wall Street Journal and read it every day that I fly. I'm one of the few people, probably the only person on an airplane, that still actually reads a paper as a paper. I like it. It's old-fashioned. I sit by the window. I look out the window and think, and I read, and I think about business. I come across this op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal written by a guy named Richard Sexton, and it talks about the absolute asinine idea that the city of New York would take over grocery stores. Truly, government nationalized, but it's not national, of course, it's citywide, government-run grocery stores, as has been proposed by communist, calls himself a socialist, but he's a communist, mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, in New York. This guy could be the mayor, and he's talking about running grocery stores via the government. These kinds of things sound good. Collectivization sounded good. And next thing you know, the Soviets starved. Collectivization and communism sounded good in Venezuela. And the average Venezuelan, last time I looked, had lost like 30 pounds of body weight because of food shortages. Is this going to come to the United States of America? Worse yet, is it going to come to the absolute city that screams capitalism, New York City? It might be, because this Mamdani guy might very well be the next mayor. So Richard Sexton pinned this article, and I said, I've got to get this guy on my show. We're also going to talk about a lot of other things he covers in his book, Food Fight. Professor Sexton, agricultural economist, professor emeritus, UC Davis, Minnesota dairy farm kid. You and I have some Midwest dairy roots in common, agricultural economics. I like it. Thanks for being here on the show.
It is my great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about, first off, the book Food Fight: Misguided Policies, Supply Challenges, and the Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World. Your PR people sent me a 9-page email. I appreciate it. I printed a bunch of it off. There's a couple things about your take on things that you and I will disagree on. That's fine. It means we're both thinkers. But the one thing we can both agree on, the government has absolutely no business running grocery stores. Am I right?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's probably one of Mamdani's worst ideas, and it's one that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. But if it were put into place, it would be a disaster for New Yorkers, to be sure.
So a lot of what this guy, and if you don't know, and you're saying, Damian, I'm listening to your show because I'm in agriculture. I'm out here in Nebraska. What the hell do I care about New York? You care because, unfortunately, this sort of... to call it socialism is really, again, it's misstatement, because he's really taken a page right out of the of Karl Marx's doctrine. It talks about rent controls, which is interesting. New York already has that. It talks about government should own all private property, so that therefore it's cheaper, which that's normally not the case either. Removing all sorts of private ownership structures, but then also the grocery stores. And they love to use the word food desert, which is interesting. A bunch of my listeners probably live in food deserts far greater than the average person in New York. If you're 7 miles from the nearest grocery store, or your nearest store is 8 miles away and it's a Dollar General, you're probably worse off than many of the New Yorkers. But he wants to have the government take over grocery stores in New York. Your article talked about why not only this is a bad idea, it's bad for supply, it's bad for policy, the government's bad at running businesses, but those that do so are so much better. And you cited Walmart. Give us your numbers and your take on that, please.
Well, sure. I mean, New York City and LA are the two cities in the United States that have kept Walmarts out. And Walmart didn't sell groceries at all until the mid 1980s, and now they're the largest grocery retailer in the world, and in this country they have about a 25% market share, and they're just really good at it. They squeeze all the costs they can squeeze out of the supply chain. But I've talked to a lot of processors and shippers that have contracts with Walmart. That's their prize contract. They're most proud that they've got a contract with Walmart, that they met the standard to be a Walmart supplier. And there's lots of studies out there, Damian, that say what savings does Walmart generate? And what I used in the Wall Street Journal piece was kind of a midpoint estimate of about 15%. So if you want to lower New Yorkers' grocery costs, let Walmart in, and it'll lower those costs in the order of 15%. And I just did a little back of the envelope calculation, and that would save the typical New York household over $2,000 a year. So that's the low-hanging fruit. Let the private market work, and not some nutty idea in terms of bringing in government-run grocery stores.
Yeah. So if you're, and this is the tough part, you're the professor of agricultural economics, and I'm an agricultural economics guy, and I've taken a lot of economics courses. When you explain economic principles to the average person, they just absolutely, like, it flies over their head. And here's the thing: it's not because we're getting into the intricacies of of tertiary supply problems on a curve basis. We're talking about real simple stuff. The government is bad at running most things, right? The Pentagon is effective, but it's not efficient, right? They're effective at creating bombs and soldiers and that kind of thing, but they're not efficient. God knows, they buy $900 hammers, and we've all heard those stories. Walmart works on about a 24% profit margin, but that's not in their grocery sector. Aren't most groceries, Kroger, the number 2 grocery in the United States of America, aren't they working on like a 2% profit margin?
Yeah, it's 1 to 2% of sales. So no, there's not extraordinary profits, and and then they're squeezing the costs out of the supply chain everywhere they can. So the beneficiaries are the consumers that are getting their groceries far cheaper than if there wasn't this type of competition. And of course, none of that's going to happen with government-run grocery stores. They wouldn't have the scale, the purchasing power that Walmart has. They wouldn't have the supply chain set up. It would be, it would be a disaster to be sure. Just a terrible idea.
Well, the best example I just gave there was, and this is, again, attempting to explain economics, because this sounds good to somebody that has never taken an economics class, that they have some guy that's young and got a little bit of charisma, and he gets up and says, and we need government-run grocery stores to make groceries cheaper. Well, if Kroger's working on 1 to 2% margins, that means that they're willing to go in and for a 1% to 2% over their actual costs across the board, run a store and have literally tens of thousands of different items, SKUs, and the variety. And obviously, they're gifted. Their core strength is bringing in groceries and turning those over, right? The idea that the government could do this more cheaply is just an asinine proposition. That means that you think the government is going to be better than a company that can do this for about 1 to 2%. Just think about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Or think about the DMV in whatever state you're in, and waiting in line in the DMV to get your driver's license renewed, and then translate that into a government-run grocery store. It's it's just really a crazy idea, and Mamdani has a lot of crazy ideas, and that one tends not to be among the ones that they're talking about on the cable news shows and so forth. But it's it's a real bad idea, and to the extent it got put into place, it would raise the grocery costs. And then the way it would end up happening is that the government would subsidize the heck out of it. And so then if you're competing, if you're running a corner grocery or something, you're going to get pushed out by the government-run store, and so it's bad business in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, then it makes it's only one player. There's only one player, and it's the government, and they subsidize it. What's interesting about his proposal, and a lot of people have it, and I think we in ag need to pay attention to this, because what if this, we've had food inflation, we've had core inflation, we've had record for the last 5 years since the whole government shutdown of the economy during the COVID thing. But we've had food inflation like we had not seen for the 40 years prior to that, Richard. We did not see this kind of thing. So I'm afraid, as an agriculturalist, that we are going to see a push for more of this. All of a sudden, the next 34-year-old socialist in Chicago, wherever, name a place that tends to be more blue, Detroit, Los Angeles, wherever, and says, and you know what, we should follow the lead of the Zamdani or Mamdani out there in New York, and we should make all those private grocery stores government owned. And when this thing catches on like a prairie fire, you know, you can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time with these sort of sentiments that attempt to defy economics.
Well, that's absolutely right. And a good example happening right now, since I'm a Minnesotan, I still pay attention to Minnesota news, and the Democrat candidate for mayor in Minneapolis is a Democrat socialist, young Democrat socialist who sounds exactly like Mamdani. So yes, it is spreading. I haven't heard whether he wants to take over the grocery stores in Minneapolis or not, but yeah, that kind of idea can certainly spread, and it's bad news for consumers to the extent that it does.
It's terrible news. And incidentally, in one of the articles with Mamdani, and this is just to point this out again, I know that economic arguments are lost on emotional topics, but he said, well, of course, groceries would be cheaper if a government ran the grocery stores, because we wouldn't be paying for property taxes or income taxes or have to buy the real estate. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that somehow those aren't real costs? That's how this communist thing works, and why it grows like a weed in a garden is because they truly believe that then if the government has it, there's no cost. You know, like that somehow that property tax that they're not paying isn't still borne by somebody else, or the real estate that they just go in and take over has no value because they just took it over. And it's very dangerous. Again, if you know your history at all, which apparently most folks do not, which is why they're doomed to repeat it. This sort of thing happened in Venezuela, which was the wealthiest country in Latin America on a per capita basis just 30 years ago. And Richard probably can back that up. And it is true that as recently as a couple of years ago, because of food shortages, the average Venezuelan had lost like 30 pounds of body weight. This is not because they are all trying to, right? This is about availability. So this is, yet again, I think, a policy that's very bad for consumers.
Yeah, your story about Venezuela and its socialist turn is exactly correct. And as I mentioned in the Wall Street Journal piece, yeah, you can gut your tax base at the same time by taking over these private stores with a government-run store that's not going to pay the taxes that the private groceries pay. And then, as I said, I mean, one of the complaints against letting Walmart in is that they will squeeze out competition, the mom and pop stores, and so on and so forth. But what's a government-run grocery store not bearing the same costs that everybody else is bearing? What's that going to do? It's going to drive out those stores and replace it with something that's going to effectively, be a lot worse in terms of higher prices, not good product selection, and so forth.
We're going to get into other stuff. I agree with all that. So this is, again, why does a person in the business of agriculture care about this? If you're listening to this, because this is not necessarily it's already, the fire starts and then it sounds good. And again, it sounds good to young people that call themselves democratic socialists, but they're actually communists. And this could end up absolutely eroding away choice. It could end up, supplanting private. Doesn't Chicago also have a problem? They won't let Walmart in for the same thing you're talking about, or did they finally cave on that?
I think the only big cities that are keeping Walmart out right now are L.A. and New York. I think they got into Chicago.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk some more about some of the points that I can agree with or disagree with. We're talking about misguided policies, supply challenges, and the impending struggle to feed a hungry world. The book is called Food Fight. The author is Richard Sexton. He's here right now. Before we get into the next discussion on policy problems, and he's going to talk about ethanol and biofuels, I want to remind you about my friends at Redox. Redox is a family-owned company begun 31 years ago. Darren Moon's a founder, great dude. He started off in specialty crop and then worked his way into turf, and now increasingly their products are in broad acre. Redox is a bionutrient company that can help you grow better crops using less harsh synthetic stuff. Redox provides carefully sourced nutrients that are combined with biostimulants that have been proven winners for 31 years. Redox has a product called DiCap. It provides unequaled stress defense to help you increase your plant respiration and antioxidant production. It's also a fantastic source of potassium and phosphorus. It's going to be a big deal if you had to cut back on applied macronutrients now, isn't it? Find out more about DiCap and the entire Redox line. Go to redoxgrows.com. That's redoxgrows.com. Okay. Some of the policy that, and this is the tough part, you and I think absolutely there should be no government-run grocery stores, no government-owned grocery stores. Elizabeth Warren came out and said, well, you think that somehow the government can't run grocery stores? We're very good at it. Look at our military bases. I'm not sure I'm not sure that's the model that's going to work for a metroplex of 16 million or 20 million like New York. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the government has run commissaries for military commissaries for a long time, but I don't think there's much evidence as to their effectiveness and impact. And for one thing, they have a kind of a captive audience, right? That people on bases are going to have their main opportunity to shop at the commissary, and most likely those things are subsidized too. But Damian, I don't know that much about them. But yeah,
there's no question they're subsidized. There's no question they're subsidized. There's absolutely not even a debate on that. That's part of the old justification why we can pay soldiers less than they would make if they worked in the private sector, because they have free living and they also go to the commissary and their groceries are substandard market price. Let's talk about the other stuff that's policy. Now, this is a tough part for you and I. We're farm guys. We're agricultural economics guys. And we don't want government-run grocery stores, but we also have to admit the U.S. Department of Agriculture is involved in every other aspect of our business. So to say that we don't want the government in our groceries is a little bit like talking with our mouth full. We have government-backed insurance programs. We have disasters payments that if all of a sudden your crop gets wiped out, the government steps in and bails this out. We have government direct payments to farmers. We have government programs that boost the prices of things by creating demand for them. So to pretend that we don't want the government our groceries, again, are we talking with our mouth full here?
Well, I think that's a good argument to make, because the government has its hands in pretty much all facets of agricultural production in this country, but by and large they stayed out of grocery retailing. But I also think, Damian, that the heavy hand of government involvement is a lot less than, for example, when I was a kid, when there were direct price supports and so forth. I mean, those things are out the window now, and so the main program that's out there is the crop insurance, and that is subsidized, no doubt about it. But I think I think you can make the argument that if we don't want them in the grocery stores, then maybe they should be a little less involved in the production side of agriculture. So I think that's a good argument that you can make.
I don't see that happening, however. And I'm just pointing this out because my listeners are smart people. They work in this industry and they know that they like the thoughts that I put out there. We're going to go ahead and say we don't want government-run grocery stores and we don't want this, but you know what? We'll go to the USDA and we'll sign up for the disaster programs. And when you said there's not price support, there's not some price support yet. We're sitting at $4 corn and we're talking high nines soybeans here in the Midwest. You're below the cost of production. I'm old enough to remember it's not that long ago. LDP with a loan deficiency payment, which wasn't really a loan. They called it loan deficiency payment, but it wasn't a loan. It was an absolute subsidy. And so I could see that being called for again another year or two if we continue in this situation. And I believe that we will.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. I know that for some crops in particular, these are hard times, and in some ways, it's hard times wrought by some of the bad policies that we put in place that have really engendered a lot of competition. For example, from Brazil, and so yeah, I think I mean one of the hallmarks of this country has been its strong agriculture, and I don't doubt at all that the federal government's going to step in if it feels like it needs to preserve that strength and not let a lot of farmers go out of business. But then, Damien, on the other hand, we're paying them to go out of business with some of these conservation reserve programs, and that's another thing that I have a problem with, that would take good land out of production, and it just causes land to come into production someplace else. It's probably not as good, and so that's part of the equation as well.
Okay, so I want to, while we're talking about policy, so we've gone from the groceries then to government policies. Let's talk about the policy of conservation reserve program. I've actually hypothesized, theorized, speculated, predicted. Okay, we can go through all those type of words that the Conservation Reserve Program right now in the United States of America gobbles up about 26 million acres. I think I'm within a million on that either way. Roughly 360 to 380 million cropland acres in the United States. That covers everything from specialty crop to the corn and soybeans and wheat, which are the three big ones, of course. So I have predicted that because of low commodity prices and because of the fact that we've got such an oversupply, there will be a doubling of conservation reserve program, a call to do that in the next 5 years. Am I out in left field on that?
Well, no, I don't think you're out in left field on that, because when prices are low, people start thinking about taking product out of production. But the fallacy of that thinking is that we can take product out of production here in this country. The Europeans are doing that big time. I mean, they want to take 10% of their land out by 2030. And those are places that are good at producing. We're very good at it here in the U.S. and most parts of Europe. They're good at things like wheat and so forth. And so, you take it out here, it's coming in someplace else. It's coming in spades in Brazil, for example, and other places as well. And Damien, these are global markets, and so if we take it out here and it goes in someplace else, the prices aren't going to rise. And
yeah, they'll just the Brazil, use Brazil as the example, or it could be even Ukraine if they can, depending on who ends up being in control of Ukraine, or it could be one of the four countries that end in stan, Kazakhstan, whatever stan, certainly not Afghanistan or Pakistan because they suck at the agricultural production, but some of the Uzbekistan maybe, Australia could even ramp up, possibly even India. So I get it that if we take acres away here, then these other developing agricultural producers, which is what they've been doing since the 80s, really, grab more acres, just create more acres.
Yes, and that's a big problem, because if you're, again, if you're an environmentalist and then you're saying, we got to take this land out of production, we'll put it in conservation, that'll be better for the environment, that'll stop greenhouse gases. But what it misses is that what you take out in productive places like here in the U.S. or in Europe, you end up replacing it with land elsewhere that might be in the Amazon, it might be rainforests in Southeast Asia. That you deforest those areas, bring those into production, and so it's a net loser for the environment. And
right.
So these types of programs are not effective.
Now, here's the thing: from a policy standpoint, whatever policy we do we can't impact those countries that much. So there is the argument to be made that we might as well just do whatever policy is best for the United States of America, because those places are going to continue to do environmentally degrading activities regardless. How do you respond?
Well, these are global problems, right? So whatever we think about climate change or warming, the word that goes in front of it is global climate change, global warming. And so much of these policies, Damien, are being put into place because they're designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so that if we reduce them here in the US or Europe reduces them, but they increase more elsewhere in Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, and so forth, we're not doing anything to solve the problem. In fact, we're exacerbating the problem because these places most likely are not going to be as efficient at producing as we are and won't have the environmental controls that we have here in the US and that Europe has. So taking land out of production in the most productive places and encouraging deforestation in less productive places is really a bad policy.
Well, essentially, it's offshoring environmentalism. I want to feel good. I'm a wealthy Western European resident. I want to feel good about things. So I want to see this not be cropland over here. I want to see it be unicorns and prairie grass, which is all fine. But like you said, then we just grab the acres down in Brazil. So it took them until this point in the show to start talking about climate change. I told them we were going to disagree about this because I have a hard time being convinced that there is such a thing as man-caused climate change, and also if there is, it's almost it's so insignificant of a point because our yields for everything except for a little bit of coffee continue to go up. And so I believe that whatever technological innovations we come up with can absolutely be handled if we have a little bit of a change in the weather. I think climate change is great for the United Nations because it becomes their boogeyman that justifies their budget and their bureaucratic power. But while we're talking about this whole issue, it's entities like the United Nations, World Economic Forum, the rich people that fly into Davos, the billionaires that fly into Davos to meet with other politicians and bureaucrats and then other billionaires, then talk about how they need to force the rest of us plebes, to not live as well as them. They're having lobster flown in for their dinner, but we're supposed to cut back on our meat consumption. And you've made the point in your book, again, talk about asinine policy. This is not going to change the weather. Whether I ate a cheeseburger at lunch here today, whether I do that or not, is not going to change the weather. You talk about this whole thing about the war on meat or livestock, animal agriculture being misguided.
Well, that's right. And so if you talk to people and read what people say about the food production problem moving forward, they're going to come up with about two or three main things. First of all, we can simply eat less, pointing out the obesity problem that, for example, we have in this country. Secondly, they say we can eat less meat and dairy. And then thirdly, they say we can waste less food. But the problem is that as incomes rise across the world, particularly in these emerging countries, remember, Damian, China and India together are 35% of the world's population, and those countries have been growing very rapidly. And as you grow and your incomes rise, you want less rice, you want less maize or corn, you want less tubers, you want more meats, dairies, fruits, and vegetables. And those are ways. I mean, it is a fact that people eating meat and dairy is not an efficient way to produce food, in the sense that, particularly for cattle, they convert feed inputs into food outputs for humans less efficiently than if we were just consuming the grains and so forth ourselves. Now, I'm not at all a fan of saying, we're gonna tax meat. So that's one of the things they say. We got to have meat taxes so people consume this meat. I don't want to do that, but I want to recognize that as incomes rise across the globe, people are going to want to eat more meats, not less, and that adds to our food production challenges. And so, we shouldn't be doing a lot of stupid things like taking productive land out of production in the name of the environment when there is this demand growth that's going to be coming at us full force as we move through this century.
Yeah. So first off, humans are omnivores by nature, which means we eat everything. Humans do want protein. In the United States of America, we're about the protein, and we consume about as much or more animal protein as anyone else on the planet. We're around 220 pounds combined of poultry, pork, beef, and some seafood, and we're not going to get away from that. It's a lobbying push by the vegan crowd that I think it's to make money, obviously, and the Bill Gates investing in vegan meat companies. Trust me, the packaging that somehow that was healthier for the environment or healthy for us was really also predicated on, we want you to make this switch because it's good for our business. It was not really based on fact.
Yeah, the idea that plant-based meat substitutes were going to take off, that's in the past. There's the market share for all of those plant-based so-called meat substitutes is just about 4%, and it's really leveled off. And then if you look at the stock of some of these plant-based companies, they've totally cratered, right? So
I just pulled it up, Richard, about a month or so ago for a presentation that I gave, and Beyond Meat at its peak to where it is today, I think the company is valued today at about 4 or 5% of what it was when it was all hyped. But it was all hype. It was again the Bill Gates effect and the other wealthy investors. They basically could buy media. Celebrities could garner media, and what was that 2020, 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Yeah, 5 years ago was the apex for those things. And that, yeah, I was looking at some of those stock valuations myself just the other day. And, I forget which one it was. Impossible Foods or Beyond Meats had sold at about $195. And when I looked a couple days ago, it was like $348. So more than 95%.
Yeah, I think that was it lost about 95% of their value. And the point I make out to my audience is, let's face it, I was going to the grocery store in Phoenix during the whole COVID shutdown stuff. My wife and I saw on the news that there was fist fights over toilet paper in the parking lot, so she thought I was a better fighter than she was if I had to fight somebody over toilet paper. And I knew my instincts were good. My instincts are good. And I said, an American consumer that says constantly, I want to know where my food comes from. An American consumer that says, I want natural, that consumer is going to object to, and then ultimately the marketplace will reject these foods, Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger and all that kind of stuff. No, not everybody. The few, like you said, the few percent of the population that's going to eat that crap. But when I went to the grocery store during the toilet paper fights of the COVID shutdowns, and I saw literally bare shelves. I saw barren shelves, which I'd never seen. It reminded you of the video footage of what the USSR looked like back in the 80s. And I walked by the Beyond Burger display, and it was overflowing. And I thought, oh my God. My instincts are dead on. Even when people are fighting in the parking lot over toilet paper and fearful that they might die, they still won't buy this shit. They still they still reject fake meat. So I think right about that. I want to get into a couple other of government policies that you actually take a little bit of a differing tone on, and that'd be biofuels. Before I do that, I want to remind you about our friends at Harvest Returns. Harvest Returns, I'm wearing their awesome hat right here. My buddy Chris Raleigh down there in Texas started Harvest Returns because he understands that if you have an agribusiness, you might need financing that does not fit the conventional cookie cutter, go to a bank and get a loan type of a situation. But you need money. Your operation's unique, so why should you try to fit a square peg into a round hole with one-size-fits-all agricultural credit? Harvest Returns can help. Chris and the gang down at Harvest Returns understand that every agribusiness is different, and so they got a pool of 18,000 investors. Think about that. There's 18,000 investors that put money into the Harvest Returns system, and they come up with creative financing options. Harvest Returns can bring the capital you need to reach your business goals. Visit www.harvestreturns.com. That's harvestreturns.com to learn more about how you can get started growing your operation today with the financing you need to build a better tomorrow. Biofuels. You've got a problem with biofuels. That doesn't make you very popular at the ag meetings, Richard.
Well, and probably not with your audience either. So, yeah, my problem with biofuels is that it comes back to our earlier conversation. Our use of corn and soybeans to produce biofuels is driven completely by policy. It's driven by subsidies based upon the belief that these fuels burn cleaner and are better for the environment. And they do burn cleaner, but are they better for the environment? And that comes back to the question that if we're using here in the United States 30 to 35% of our corn to produce ethanol, we're using now about half of our soybean oil to produce diesel fuels, then we're just causing more of those products to be produced across the world in places like Brazil. We're deforesting Indonesia and Malaysia to produce palm to replace the vegetable oils that are going into biofuel production. So, when you take those full environmental consequences into account, Damian, the fact that they burn cleaner, but that they cause deforestation and land use expansion literally across the globe, the environmental reasons for public subsidies of biofuels kind of go out the window. And I recognize that those industries are an integral part of the Midwest, not only for production, but for, the production of ethanol. They're not going anywhere, but, we are deluding ourselves if we think that these biofuels are positives for the environment and deserve the public subsidies. The research that's been done, since we passed the renewable fuel standard here in California, we've got a big environmental policy. The research shows that once you factor those land use changes in, the pro-environmental implications are gone.
So I have had Jeff Cooper, the CEO of the Renewable Fuel Association, on this show. I have spoken to ethanol companies, clients, audiences. They don't like sometimes my commentary, which is not the same as yours, but there's a similar thread in that I said, this to the person who's in the corn business or the soy business, it's demand and it's homegrown, and it helps. There's a lot of small towns that benefit from this, and there's a lot of farming operations that, because then of the biofuels, they can go and buy a new truck at the dealership, and the dealership can employ a mechanic. And I mean, there is that economic multiplier index effect, right? And so it's a real, and also it's been around for 20 years. You start unraveling this, you're talking about. It'd be like trying to get rid of Social Security. It'd be like trying to get rid of, anything that has gotten to where it's built in to an economic model, and here it is. So what do you see happening on that biofuel front? Now, I tell my ethanol crowds this. I said, you're not going to like this, but you're a short-term solution to a longer-term problem. Longer-term problem is we got too much production, and eventually, if we go electric, we're not, electric cars don't need this. So there is a lot of tentacles on this one.
Absolutely, there are, and I mean, Trump has gotten rid of some of these EV mandates, and so that's good for the ethanol industry. And the big frontier now is sustainable aviation fuel, right? Mm-hmm. So that if ethanol qualifies for that, and I totally agree. Ethanol's not going to go anywhere.
By the way, my understanding, we've been hearing about sustainable aviation fuel, and my understanding from the people that are in this space is that we're years away because we can't make aviation fuel using corn or soy even anywhere close to what the actual market price is. With the process, we still don't have the technology, and we're like 3 to 5 times the price. So it's even a subsidy of a 20% tax credit or something wouldn't bridge that gap. So that may not happen.
Yeah, but there's mandates in place right now that were put in place in Biden's administration. Now Trump's administration may come and get rid of those, but if those are in place, then they're going to have to subsidize its production enough to get it. And there's a subsidization plan in place now. Whether it's enough remains to be seen. But, Damian, what I would say is, again, I'm a Midwesterner, and I understand the importance of ethanol and biodiesel and renewable diesel to the Midwest and the plants that do this processing. But the industry keeps asking for more. They want, they want sustainable aviation fuel. They want E15, not E10, and so on and so forth. And, it can have a short-term impact on price, to be sure, but all it's going to do is increase production across the rest of the world with bad environmental consequences and bad consequences for our domestic prices. Because as long as these are global markets, and they are, again, we're talking tariffs and so forth in this country, but ultimately these are global markets.
Right.
So what happens in Brazil, what happens in Argentina, what happens in Malaysia, it's all part of the same equation. And so, one of the things I say in the book is that these policies, once we put them in place, they don't go away. And so, no, ethanol's not going to go away. And I'm not saying it should go away, but I think we should start thinking twice before we say, let's do E15 and things like that, because the reason we put those standards in place, the renewable fuel standard and so forth, a lot of that's been withered away by our better understanding of how we're converting lands elsewhere in the world to produce these things, because we're using our lands not to produce them for food, but to use them for fuel.
Okay, I'm going to throw this at you, and we can do a lot of stuff about policy here. And you and I we're farm kids. We're all about this. But you've made the point here a number of times that because what we do, take 26 million acres out and put it into CRP, which was, about what, 7 to 8% of our
7%, yeah.
7% of our cropland is CRP. Most of it was the crap. Most of it was the rocky, hilly, highly erodible shit that doesn't get, that doesn't get rain. Parts of my friends out there in Sherman County, Oregon, where they get 8 inches of precipitation and they were farming 43% slopes. That should be in CRP. I'm not being mean. I'm just pointing out here. You've made the point that CRP makes it so that there's more palm oil coming out of Indonesia. You've made the point that our biofuels policy here in the United States makes it so that there's more production in less environmentally adherent countries. I could make the argument that those places are going to pop up and do what they do regardless, because to your point, it's a global market. So the only reason that our acres would stay in production of that to go and fill the global market versus going to CRP or going to an ethanol plant would be that if we were cheaper. And you can argue that those places might be as cheap as us, and so they were going to develop their own palm oil or soybean production or safflower or canola, whatever that thing should be, regardless of U.S. policy. And I almost feel like you and I need to sit down and have a couple of drinks on this one, but we don't have, we can't do that. I think I can make that argument that this happens regardless of our policy. Could you?
No, I don't agree with that argument. I think our policy, and I think Europe's policy, has driven a lot of it. I mean, we are the most efficient corn producer in the world. We're the biggest exporter, and if you look across the gamut, the U.S. is the most efficient corn producer, the most efficient soybean producer. Interestingly, we're not the world's most efficient wheat producer anymore relative to a lot of countries, and the reason we're not is because the most productive land for wheat has been pushed out to produce corn and soybeans associated with biofuels. And so, no, it is the increases in price. And the studies showed that after the renewable fuel standards went into place, corn prices went up about 30%. It is the higher prices that we have generated for those crops from our biofuel policies that have spurred the expansion more or less across the globe. So again, you don't have to produce soybeans in Indonesia to produce vegetable oil. You can produce palm oil. And so these products are highly substitutable. And so, if we're going to use soybeans to produce renewable diesel instead of cooking oil, then canola is going to come in.
So you would argue that the biofuel thing, really, we create our own competition. And I know that in ag, we say, we create our competition. We went to these other countries and taught them how to produce and let them steal our technology or take our intellectual property, or let these multinational companies, John Deere or whatever, go to foreign countries and take American ingenuity and ramp up their production. You're saying the other concern is you think we created our competition, our biofuel policy, you think created more global competition for where those things can go, namely vegetable oil and feedstocks, of course.
Absolutely. I think I absolutely believe that. And I think at the end of the day, the fact that we've done that, even though we had the best, I think, of environmental intentions by putting these policies into place, we really haven't benefited the environment because, we've deforested the Amazon, we've deforested Indonesia, Malaysia, and the list goes on.
Professor Sexton, I'm going to throw it out there. I never believed, I believed the environmental argument was promotion. It was really about gobbling up bushels to keep the farm belt happy and to keep the companies that sell or loan to the farm belt happy. I know that the environment was the lead, that was the sugarfoot that we went out with, but I believe that even those that used the environmental argument for biofuels really knew that that was a nice hot button to push. But the reality was it was about creating demand for our stuff.
Well, it's a good way to get a, political coalition together, right? Because you can get the ag people that want to do right by their ag constituents, but then you can get the the senators from the cities and so forth, because they are going to value the environmental dimension. So it put a good coalition together. But I also think, Damien, that we didn't, at the time we did these things, didn't really fully understand these land use consequences. We probably should have, because we could have seen, if we raise the prices of corn and soybeans because we're using so much of them to produce biofuels, that will lead to this expansion. But I don't think that was part of the equation when these things first went into place.
All right, so remember, I've got listeners that are in the business, and I got listeners that are producers, and some that are all of the above, and they're saying, "All right, Professor Sexton, so what? I made more money for the last 20 years since the renewable fuel standard. I made more money." And it made it so I could pay for my kid to go to college and build a new building over there, and that helped out a lot of the local businesses. So what? I mean, I'm making more money because of it. Isn't that good for the business of agriculture?
Well, certainly it is, and I think any of us, we take the policies that government puts in place, and we do the best we can with them. And so,
sometimes we create the government policy. Sometimes we we lobby to create the government policy too.
Well, absolutely, we do, and we're still doing that as it pertains to biofuels, pushing for things like E15 and for corn ethanol to qualify as a sustainable aviation fuel. So that's happening today. So again, I can sit here and say, again, I'm a Midwesterner. We grew corn on our dairy farm, Damien. We were far enough north that we could only grow it for silage. But I've grown corn, and I have no problem with people taking absolute advantage of every opportunity that they have. But for people representing these associations and so forth to say, hey, this is a win-win. It's good for farmers. It's good for the environment. It's not good for the environment, and it's good for farmers in the short term. But then when the rest of the world takes advantage of the higher prices we've generated, the prices come back down, and then we're back asking for more. We're asking for E15. We're asking for SAF.
It becomes a perpetual cycle of, oh my God, we've got to do something with all the supply. So we invent demand. It's not organic. It's invented government policy demand, and then the world supplies up to beyond what the demand really warrants, and then we get back into sub break even territory on our prices, and then we say we got to have more artificial demand. So it becomes a perpetual. It's a little bit like a junkie in the smack on the on the vein. Moving on, got a couple more big topics I want to hit with you. You say, why well-meaning, this is one of the points in your book, well-meaning efforts to support small farms and organic food production actually contribute to both food scarcity and higher food prices. Okay, Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture, she has been on a roadshow, the most visible Secretary of Agriculture since Earl Butz, Purdue man, by the way, that I can remember. She's all over the place. And she keeps going on the media and talking about supporting those small family farms. This has got a little bit of a Texas accent. And those small family farms, you help them out. And guys like you and I that are out here from an agricultural economics background, like, hey, that's cute. And I know that sells to the people in the suburbs. But the reality is, a bunch of these small family farms that we're propping up with government policy don't really produce hardly anything. From a macro standpoint, 10% of America's farms produce 90+% of all of the output. And so I think this sells and it makes a bunch of people feel good, but they don't understand agriculture. What's your problem with policy that supports the small family farms, as Brooke likes to call it?
Well, it's that they're inefficient, and as somebody who grew up on an inefficient small family farm and worked my fingers to the bone on it, I don't necessarily wish that on anybody. And so, if you got some acres on the edge of a big city or something, and you want to grow strawberries or tomatoes and sell them at a farmer's market or whatever, more power to you. But it's not a serious answer to the food production problem. And the broader point, Damian, that I make, if I could, is that in much of the world, including places like China and so forth, the farms are 1 or 2 hectares or 3 or 4 acres in size, and the reason that they're so small is that the farmers don't have secure property rights. They can't buy and sell the land for them to grow to the minimum efficient scale. So the problem of small farms is way more than Brooke Rollins running around saying that she wants to do things to support them. It's that whole countries are condemning their agriculture to inefficiency because they don't have property rights that would enable these farms to expand and do a better job of feeding their populations.
So we here in the United States and Canada, the bulk of my listeners would be in North America, don't have that issue. We do have private property rights and we can transact, et cetera, and we do generally have larger scale stuff. I've pointed this out. A lot of people, again, you talk about being unpopular when you say the reality is most USDA policies, and I know the New York Times or NPR, now they're defunded, love to run the stories that government policy just pays these factory farms, industrial agriculture. And I'm like, no, that's not necessarily true because first off, there's limitations on the payments and all this. A lot of USDA policy has fostered smaller farms and sometimes less efficient operations.
Yeah, that's right. Any of the support policies always max out so that the biggest farms aren't eligible for them. And I mean, there's a story to be told, to be sure, about vitality of rural areas. Then that if the farms get bigger and bigger, people move out of the rural areas, their vitality is threatened. But I'm worried about producing food efficiently, and the small farms aren't ways to produce food efficiently for most crops. Certainly for the big grains and oil seeds, you've got to have several hundred acres. You know that at least as well as me. And policies that prevent that type of expansion to meet the minimum efficient scale are ways that are going to cause us to produce less food, and that worries me.
So our last agreement and disagreement is going to be about the title of your book, The Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World. I don't see a problem. We've got a glut of everything. For 40 years, you and I are both dairy farm kids. We did the dairy buyout program 40 years ago. A lot of younger people, I have to explain this to them, where the government paid dairy farmers to exit the business and signed a contract that they would never re-enter the dairy business. Of course, a bunch of them did through the back door, and because dairy farmers love to milk cows, and also it glutted the beef. It took hamburger prices down to lost wages because you take 1 million Holsteins and run them through. We did the PIC program where we paid people to not plant corn in the 1980s. I can argue that we've been in surplus territory for 40 years. Or at least we started 40 plus years ago. Then the China phenomenon happened, and now we're back to having a glut. I absolutely believe that we will never struggle to feed the world because population is stagnating, is going to start declining here in another 30 years. And our productive capacity is exceeding what our consumption rate is. And then again, as you pointed out, food waste, if we get better at that, we're wasting more than a third of what we produce. You really believe there's some problem, some struggle to feed the world, or did you just put that in there to sell books?
No, I absolutely believe that, and the book is really all about that. And so, yes, I think I think you and many other well-informed people are on the ag side are kind of whistling past the graveyard in that respect. The agricultural productivity growth has stagnated. That is a fact. It was about 2% a year up until about 1990, and it's only been about a little over 1% a year. Since then, we can disagree on what impacts climate change is going to have, or even how fast the climate's going to warm. But there's hundreds of studies out there saying it's going to have a significant impact on crop yields, and then no, population's not going to level off in 30 years. It's projected to grow at least until 2080, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to how fast the population is going to grow. But then incomes are growing. People want to eat more food as their incomes grow, and they want to diversify their diets. We already talked about
that part. I'm all with you. If the global economy can grow by a few percent per year, and then the well-fed people stay well-fed, and the lesser well-fed people become better fed, I can go along with all of that. On the rate of productivity climbs, okay, I said around 2%. You said it's not been 2% since the 90s. Okay, we can haggle a little bit over that. Fine. We make enough food right now, Professor Sexton, to feed about 11 billion people, and we only got 8. That's just because of the waste. Isn't the real answer, the easy answer, reducing waste, improving infrastructure, getting better with technology's application, about not letting crops go to waste?
No, I don't believe that at all. I mean, that you are correct that the statistics say that about a third of food is wasted. I think that's unrealistically high. You end up getting researchers following behind some kind of harvesting machine, and the researchers are deciding what's left behind that is edible food, but it's probably not what's marketable food. And so I think those statistics are inflated. And then when you go to the grocery store, it takes time and effort to go to the grocery store. I mean, we don't want to buy too little. If we're going to err on the side of anything, it's going to be to buy a little bit too much, because we don't have to run back to the store just because we didn't have enough. So I think a lot of this, what we call food waste or food loss, is built into the system, and it's just the efficient way of doing business. Now, if food becomes more expensive, we'll waste less of it, but it is a pipe dream for the U.S., the UN, the World Bank. They're coming in and saying we got to cut that in half. That will never happen. That will never happen, because throughout the whole food supply chain, the amount of food waste is basically economically efficient. It's not efficient to squeeze every last little ounce of food.
Yeah, right. We're maximizing efficiency, but we're also very hard on the environment. By the time we're wasting it, we've already converted the land from forest or steppe, pasture, rangeland, or whatever it should be, into cropland. We spent the diesel fuel to plant the stuff. We bought the seed. We used the inputs, the fertilizer. We've done the degradation to the environment, and then we're wasting the stuff. So that's the environmental argument. I get that clearly, if the economics didn't warrant it, we wouldn't be wasting it. I mean, you and I both agree. If it had such a huge financial burden to the waste, by God, we would stop doing it, right? You and I both agree on that. But
yes.
But you talk about all the reason the ag doesn't get behind wanting to stop food waste and using the environmental argument is because it's not bad for us to allow it to be wasted. That's kind of where I see things.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if I buy too much food and waste some of it, at least that food got purchased and consumed. And remember, the other thing is that if it ends up in the landfill, it's a big greenhouse gas generator there too. So yep. Yeah, it's bad on the environmental side. But yeah, I just think, and one of the things in the book I look at is the prevalence of refrigeration. And a lot of the poor parts of the world, they don't have it yet. So you say, well, once they get refrigeration, they'll waste less food. But then as incomes rise, people care less about, squeezing every last.
Yeah. So you give the 600 million Africans electricity who currently do not have it, and then they get a refrigerator. If they've got enough money to have a refrigerator for the first few years, that reduces food waste. And then by the time they get to where they have air conditioning, refrigerator, a stove, then they don't really care about $3 worth of food that gets wasted per week or whatever it should be.
Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I knew we could agree on something, even though you were disagreeing with me about a lot of other stuff. That's all right, though.
I think I agree with you on a lot of stuff, too.
Well, you and I definitely, you see more of a, your book's titled Supply Challenges and the Impending Struggle, that in your subtitle, to Feed a Hungry World. I just don't see supply challenges given our technological innovation and where we are right now. We're getting better in terms of the natural resources consumed per unit of production. I I don't see supply. The only reason I would see supply challenges, Professor, would be if we have a European Union style government in more countries, even like big producers like the United States, Canada, Brazil, and said we must convert half of our acres to organic. Then there would be a supply drop because of the adoption of a new way of methodology, as well as reduction in the inputs that we've become accustomed to using. The reason I would see a big supply challenge would be if we enforced some sort of new methodology and called it because of environmental grounds.
Well, let me just give you three or four bullets to challenge that. And the first bullet I'll give you is that yes, lots of places in the world are have explicit mandates to expand things like organic, which is definitely a less efficient way to produce foods.
Yes,
Agricultural productivity growth has slowed. That is a fact. And then there's these other headwinds that I talk about in the book. Again. We don't have to agree.
I want to go back to first off. Yes, you and I both agree about going on your number 2 point because you've said that now. I thought that our productive index was going up by about 2% a year. You just told me that was until the 90s. Now we're down to 1%. But let's just think about this: if our population, if our birth rates are screeching to a halt, they really are globally, and we're going to advance our population at a much lesser grade, 1% climb, though, on let's just use corn as our example, 1% on 190 bushels versus 2% back when it was 100 bushels is roughly the same damn thing. So I guess if our output percentage growth factor is slowing as a percentage, you and I both know if I never did a push-up and I started lifting weights, my percentage of muscle gain would be greater early on than it would be if I had been doing it for 10 years. I think we can make the same argument about global agriculture. Modern agriculture's productive gains might be slowing on a percentage basis, but we're doing it at a much higher level. And so I can argue that that's still going to be a moot point.
Well, I mean, that certainly is an argument. I get your math on that. I think there's no question that your math is correct in that regard, but there are headwinds that we haven't experienced, as a civilized society, up ahead of us, and that I talk about in the book. And then, I also think that demand is expanding faster. Yeah, we can argue about how fast population's growing, but other pieces to the puzzle on the demand side are income growth, dietary diversity, and the use of agricultural products to produce fuels, not food. And so all of those are ticking up as we move forward. And then we have places, taking productive lands out of production and so forth. So that, again, the idea of policies, government policies across the world, not just the U.S., definitely Europe, some of the Asian countries are saying we're going to produce less food. We're going to produce less food by taking land out, by encouraging inefficient ways like organic of producing it. And so, when I looked out at the landscape, I saw challenges that we have not experienced in this, in the centuries leading up to this.
And those right there, the four that you told me, since I'm whistling past the graveyard, it's an old person statement, by the way, Professor Sexton. I like it, but I don't know if the young kids do statements. I don't know if they do. They just text and all that. They don't do things like whistling past the graveyard. You said there's the organic push that could be coming, or changing a methodology. There's the decrease in productivity gains. There's the demand growth based more on economics, a little bit on population, but certainly on economics. And then obviously you talked about more places. Well, Brazil's taking sugarcane, turning it into biofuel also. So it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. Absolutely. European phenomenon too, to be sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. His name is Richard Sexton. He's a professor emeritus from the UC Davis Department of Agricultural Economics. He's got a book out. It's called Food Fight, Misguided Policies. Food Fight, Misguided Policies, Supply Challenges, and the Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World. If you want to learn more about Professor Sexton, you want to pick up his book, where do they go? It's there everywhere. Amazon, Target, any of the places you would order a book online, it will be there. Or it's a University of California Press book, and you can go to University of California Press's website. But
all of the places have it. But there's lots of food fight books out there, Damian, so they got to find the right one.
That's right. It's the one by Professor Richard Sexton. I actually looked it up, and there's at least a half dozen different books called Food Fight. Not to be confused with Food Fear, which is my book that's right over my left shoulder over here in the background of this shot. Again, do check out my YouTube channel, hit subscribe. I really would appreciate it. And share this with somebody who can benefit from it. This is a long episode, but it's a good one because you got two people that like to talk about global stuff, marketplace, outlook, and economics, and the business of agriculture. I so much appreciate you doing this. Also, remember my sponsors. I'm wearing the lid here from my friends at Harvest Returns. Newfields Ag, great company, got a lot of cool stuff. Check out that you can go on social media and follow what Newfields Ag has. Really good stuff going on. A lot of lineup of products that's going to be a more sustainable lineup of products for crop inputs. You can use them. And then, of course, my friends over at Redox Bionutrients. Go to redoxgrows.com and check out all those awesome places. So next time, thanks for being here. Thank you, Professor Sexton, for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Damian.
I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, sincere thanks for joining us here on another episode of The Business of Agriculture. I want to ask you, if you farm, are you looking for more productive efficiencies to grow higher yielding, better performing crops? Well, of course you are. Newfields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. If you want to learn more about the Newfields Ag product lineup, go to newfieldsag.com for information.